Following is a video tutorial for how to create assembly files in Fusion 360. We're going to be doing this through the lens of our CANstruction project. And this year, 23-24, our Glenbrook South Can Food Drive theme is called the 40th Caniversary. So to play off of that theme of the 40th year for the Can Food Drive, we are going to make a giant 4 and a 0. They're going to stand about 4 feet tall, at least that's the hope. And so I want to take some time here today in this video to show you how to create that assembly. So it's going to start by creating a part file. And for the most part, we're going to have simple part files like soup cans or cereal boxes or a mac and cheese box. Either it's a cylinder that's extruded, or it's a square, or it's a rectangle that gets extruded. And then we can take that up a level by applying a decal to that. So I'll show you how to do that in a different tutorial. But once you get that can created and you get your label slapped on there, you want to create an assembly, an array of cans, multiple cans that you can use to build out your design. And so for this 4 and 0, we're actually going to be stacking 12 racks. So 12 cans that are going to come in a tray. You can see the assembly down here if I open up this file. So this would be that next step. Once you get your item created, if you're going to use multiples of those items and try to pack them in, you want to create an array of them, and we can pattern this out. So we bring in one can, and then we do a rectangular pattern. You can see my history down here for that. There was a rectangular pattern. I did a rigid group on this to lock all the items in place. We'll talk more about that as we get through the tutorial here. But you end up creating this 12 pack, and then from there, with some additional support materials, we have these wooden panels at different sizes in order to accommodate the space and the sizing needed for each one of these 12 packs. And we're going to stack them into another assembly file to create the end effect that we're looking for. So I'm going to take you through that process to get started. I'm going to go File, New Design, and I'm going to bring in one soup can. So you can literally just click on it right here from your data panel and drag it into the space. Oh, but when you try to do that, it says your design is not saved yet. And this is a weird little nuance that Fusion 360 has for when you're trying to drag in other parts to create an assembly file. They want you to save it first, which is fine. So we'll go to File, Save, and make sure you're putting it in a correct location, create a new folder for this project. And with that, I'm just going to call it the 12 can assembly. Put demo on it because I already have that same file showed you. So I'm just going to add demo to that and click save. Now that I've officially saved this empty file, I can drag other files into it. This first can, and it will position it right above the origin, and its default location here is perfectly fine. The first item you drag in is normally going to be perfectly fine right on top of the origin. So I'm just going to say okay. Now there's a couple of tricks that we can do here to keep this can in position while we bring other things into play. The move for that is going to be a right click here in the browser list, right on that item, and you want to find the word ground. That's going to pin this item in onto the origin and should keep it from sliding around on us. The next step is going to be to do this rectangular pattern. So I'll bring up rectangular pattern. I'll select my item here. Notice there is object type is set to bodies. So we want to switch this up to components. And this is a different file we brought in. It's considered a component. So you switch object type to component, rectangular pattern. We can then go and select some axes here. You can use the origin axes that are in the file to begin with. And we just have to establish a value for displacement here. The cans are roughly 2.69 inches in diameter. So if we'd say 2.7, and then for distribution here, we switch that to spacing instead of extent, and it gives us a different look at how we can spread these out. So 2.7 on spacing for distribution. And if I look top down at this, you'll notice those cans are basically snugged right next to each other. So 2.7 is a good number. How many do you want? Well, we're going to go in one direction with 3, and in the other direction, we're going to go with 4 cans. So I want to go back and select another axis. And actually, I can just set my distance here, I believe, 2.7, and up that to 4, and that's how I create my 12 rack. So they're kind of darker right now. That's just during this, this patterning feature. As soon as we say OK, everything lightens up again. You'll see we have 12 cans floating out here in this assembly. If I try to grab one of these items, try to grab a can and move it around, we want to make sure that these files are locked in position and they're not going to float around on us like that just did there. Okay, so the thing is, we grounded our first item, but we have not constrained these other items to this can. And so the quickest and easiest way to do this is to go to Assemble Rigid Group. Pull up Rigid Group. You can select all of the components. You can do it a lot quicker here in the list by selecting the first one. Hold Shift on your keyboard and select the bottom one to get everything in between. All items included, include child components. Leave that checked and say OK. Now, all of those items will be constrained to each other. If I try to pull them off, they're not going to be able to go anywhere. So that is it for your 12 can tray assembly. If you need other sizes, of course, you just change your pattern and you adjust it accordingly. If you need to do something in a circular pattern, you can do that. But you get all your items placed in here, you pattern them into position, and then you do some constraining. Now, this is just to create this 12 rack. So I'm going to go through how to use the joint feature next when we actually start to build out our end product here, which is going to be a 4. So we'll move on to that next. So I'm going to go File, New Design. And with that, again, we have to say Save. So File, Save. And I'm going to call this number 4 Assembly Demo. I had a couple other ones over here already. I did a 4 the other day and put it on a slant. And after some review, I think we're going to end up just making a 4 that has a leg that goes straight up. So that's my version 2 for that. But starting a new one here for the sake of this video, number 4 Assembly Demo. Make sure the location is set to the right folder and click Save. We can start to bring these in. So I'm going to bring in a 12 rack. Place that in to the file. And again, it's going to hover it right around the origin. And we're going to say OK to get it placed. Got to check to make sure this item's not going to be floating around on us in the free space, right? Like it did right there. I'm just going to hit Control Z to make sure it goes back to its original position there. And you'll notice that if we right click and ground the item, that's not going to be enough. It's still going to end up floating around. So we'll say Control Z again, and we want to try that rigid group option. So rigid group, select this. It asks rigid group 1 constraint, select the components, continue, say yes, and say OK. Hopefully this time it will not be floating around on us anymore. And if you highlight a can and it's entirely blue and you click on it and try to drag away from it, it should not be moving. So that's how we lock in that very first item. And now, because that item, this whole assembly is locked in place, everything else we bring in, we're going to joint it to this, and it's all going to stay locked in position for us. So next step, we're going to bring in a wooden panel. And these, again, are very simple to make. You just draw out a rectangle, extrude it up. The thickness of the material that we're going to use, we're going to shoot for about a 1/2 inch material plywood for all of these panels. So I have them already set to a 1/2 inch thick. I'm just going to go ahead and drag this first one in. And every time you drag in a part, you're going to get the options here to grab these arrows and kind of move it around. And remember, this is just to position it in front of you. This is not locking it in place in any way. We're just getting it on the screen, positioning it in front of us, and we'll say, okay, this item can still move around freely. We want to lock it in place. So we're going to go to Joint. With the Joint command, you want to select, you'll notice when you move your mouse around the object that you're going to try to constrain, you're going to get these different attachment points. All these different nodes we can pick, and then if we need to, give it an offset to kind of position it right above this 12 stack of cans here. Just a quick mention, if you go to the Motion tab, there are different types of joints that you can apply, ones that allow things to move, and we can animate those later on. But we're going to want a rigid joint, everything in this project. So we're just going to say rigid, go back to the Position tab. I'm going to click on this corner here from underneath the wooden panel. And then with the cans down here, we really don't have any great hard corners to click on. So I'm just going to click on the top ring, the outer ring of this can. You'll notice it brings the wood right to there. But now I want to position this so that it's like centered right above our can. So I can just do this manually, grabbing these arrows and finesse the piece of wood into position. And that actually looks pretty good to me. We could get real specific about how far off the edge and how much we have overhanging on each side. In fact, it looks like we could do a slight bit better. I noticed with these dragging arrows that if you zoom in more, the increments will be smaller. So that's a cool little feature, smaller incremental movements depending on how zoomed in you are. So I'm going to try to just position this back. I think I'm looking for like 2.7 or 1.7 rather. Let's see what that looks like. No, maybe 1.6. So let's go back 1.6 there. That looks good from left to right, from top to bottom. Probably the same thing, 1.6. And that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to say okay to this. And if I go back to my home view, you can see again that that piece of wood is now centered, more or less. We visually centered it right above our 12th pack of cans. So I'm going to say okay. If you try to move that piece of wood, it should not be able to go anywhere. It is now permanently constrained to that can below. You can actually see the constraint that we added here as a little icon. Once you're done, we can turn those off right here with the eyeball next to joints. And then, of course, we're keeping track of it down here in our timeline. So we want to keep going up. We're going to bring in another 12 pack. And we get the option to position it somewhere on the screen. So I've just been raising it up, get it above where we want to be. And now this is going to be even easier from here on out. Click on joint, and I'm going to click on the bottom ring of this first can. And instead of clicking the wood, I'm going to click the top ring of the can that's below it. And now I'm just going to offset the height 0.5 inches, half of an inch, because that's how thick we made the wooden panels. So this will be a much easier way to just stack these then as we go through. So another wooden panel coming in. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm actually going to tether it to the wood panel that we have in there already and just displace it by 4 inches because 4 is the height of the can. So zoom in here, get that point, and then offset it 4 inches. If you want to check it from the front view, make sure things aren't overlapping. This is coming together very nicely. We'll go back to a little isometric view there. And I just real quickly want to check the 4 that I had going and see how many layers we had there at the bottom. So we're going to do 3 layers of 12 packs and then do a larger panel for that 4th layer. So I just wanted to double check that as I'm making my way through this demo. Bring in another rack of cans, raise it up. This is where we're going to do pretty much rinse and repeat here. So joint, bottom ring, rotate your screen, top ring, offset it 0.5, click OK. That stack of cans is in position. Now we're going to bring in a slightly larger panel on this next move. And for that, let me double check here. Assembly. That was a 33 by 8.5 panel. So bring in our 33 by 8.5. Raise it up above my current assembly. Click on joint. Rotate so I can get this bottom corner here on the wooden panel. Rotate back so I can get the top corner here on that wooden. Same difference, 4 inches offset. Now we have this longer panel in here so we can bring in more cans. So for this, bring in another stack of cans. Raise it up above the surface. Join it. Bottom ring from that corner can. Top outer ring from that corner can. Give it a 1/2 inch offset. Notice there I'm zoomed out a little bit, so it jumped to 1 inch. If I zoom back in, it'll do it in 1/2 increments. I like that feature. So okay. And now we need to get 2 more cans right next to it. We could do a rectangular pattern for that, but we're going to lose out on some data if we don't do this by bringing in another 12 pack. So we're just going to bring in another 12 pack, raise this up, click OK. And for this time around, we're going to do a joint from this outer ring to this outer ring. We want these cans to be right next to each other. So we're going to do an offset. Let me just rotate my screen so I can see this a little better. We're going to do an offset here of 2.7. Same number we used to actually create that 12 pack. So it's going to have the same amount of separation as it moves into the next one. So we'll click OK. Just go back to my home view. You can see it put that 12 pack and the selection we made for this ring, 2.7 inches on center from this ring in that 12 pack. Let's do that again. Bring in another one. Raise this up. Click OK. Go to joint. We will say top ring here to top ring there. And then offset that 2.7 inches. Click OK. All right. Now we're going to land another 33 by 8.5 inch panel right on top of this one. So we'll bring this panel up and joint it. For this one, we're just going to take this bottom outer corner and then the top outer corner on the larger panel that we have already in position, and then 4 inches above there. Click OK. Now we're going to split into the two ends or the two top towers of our 4. So I'm going to bring in another 12 pack, raise this up, click OK, joint, outer bottom ring to outer top ring, 1/2 inch separation, click OK. And then on the other side, same thing. This one in, click OK. We're going to joint from, it doesn't really matter which one you're picking as long as you're being consistent with your selection. So I'm going to go the left outside can here and just do the left outside can there. Separation, say OK. Now we're bringing in those 11.25 by 8.5 panels. We're just going to stack them on top of the cans that we have here. So raise that up, click OK, joint, bottom corner, top corner, 4 inches, other side. And we're just going to repeat this process then of 12 pack and then panel, 12 pack and then panel until we've reached our maximum height of 11 tiers, 11 rows. Okay, so we're getting pretty close to the end here. I want to count my layers. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If I check my finished one from the other day, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We got 2 more rows to go. So let's go ahead and finish this off. Bring in 2 more 12 packs. And if you notice there, as I sped up through the video, I was bringing in 2 of those at one time and then jointing them into position. That's perfectly fine. It really depends how you want your timeline to look down here. If it's easier to just do one import and then joint it into position and continue that process, you're welcome to do so. If you're able to manage bringing in multiple things and then jointing them all at once, that's okay too. It's all about workflow and what works best for you. Okay. 2 more wooden panels here. So we got 10 layers right now. And we're about to put on our 11th one. 2 of those panels in. Shimmy this guy over. Get them jointed into position. Remember, that's a 4-inch offset, as you see me doing the whole time here. Joint the other side. If you ever select the wrong point, you can always just hit the X here to get rid of it and then try clicking something different. 4 inches. And now 1 more to go. As a matter of fact, looking at it like this, it doesn't look half bad at 10. I remember I brought it up to 11 here on the 4 so I could bring this end all the way over to it. But 10 actually looks pretty good. Um, we might end up doing just 10 in our physical design, depending on how many cans we can actually get brought in. But for the sake of the tutorial video, we'll bring this all the way up to 11. So last joints coming in here. Go can to can, offset that 0.5. Same side, can to can, offset at 0.5. So this will be our finished version of the 4 that we're going to try to make in real life. This will also be the 4 that you're responsible for making here in class. And then based on what you've learned throughout this process, you can apply your knowledge to a second custom design that you're going to come up with as a team. Thanks for watching the tutorial. I'll catch you next time. See you later, Glenbrook South.